The kettle had just begun to whistle. I turned off the stove, letting the scent of peppermint fill the kitchen. It reminded me of winter mornings when Charles was little, how he'd wrap both hands around his mug and pretend he was drinking from a wizard's chalice. I still had his old mug. It sat alone on the counter now, beside mine. Outside, the sky was turning the color of pewter. I reached for my shawl and glanced at the clock. 3:50. 8 p.m. He said he'd be here by 4. Always punctual, my son. Always dependable. The floor creaked softly under my slippers as I walked toward the front door, ready to open it the moment I heard tires on gravel. But I didn't open it. Not yet. Because I heard voices. Just beyond the door, muffled but close's voice. And hers. She won't put up a fight. Just frame it like it's for her safety. She's old, Charles. A pause. Then his voice, lower, uncertain. I know. But the house means a lot to her. Silence again. Then her again, colder this time. She doesn't need it. We do. If she moves into care, we can list it before winter. You said yourself the kitchen's falling apart. Something inside me stilled. I didn't move. Not forward, not back. My hand rested on the doorknob, trembling. They didn't know I was standing there. Listening. Listening to plans that had no room for me. Only for my things. My house. My absence. He promised he'd visit. He didn't say he'd come to erase me. The peppermint steam curled up, forgotten. The whistle had stopped. And suddenly, the house felt unfamiliar. Like I was already gone. I turned away from the door without a word. No anger. No sound. Just the quiet breaking of something deep and old. He was still my boy. But in that moment, I knew. He had crossed a line he wouldn't even realize existed until it was far too late. Would you open that door? Or would you let it close? Forever. There's a certain kind of silence only old houses know. It isn't quiet in the way empty places are. It's the silence of something held in the walls. Breath that once filled the room, footsteps that left an imprint. Memories that never bothered to leave. My house remembers. The floor still creaks at the same hour Daniel used to return from his evening walks. Always at 6:45. Always with a newspaper in hand and a remark about the sky. Even now, I glance at the window when the clock strikes that time. But there's only wind. Just wind. And the slow ache of expectation. The kitchen hasn't changed much. The same checkered curtains. The same worn handle on the pantry door. Daniel built those shelves himself. With his bare hands and a crooked smile. I remember the scent of fresh pine when he sanded the wood down in our garage. That garage is half empty now. Charles cleared out the tools 2 summers ago. Said they were rusting. Said I didn't need them. But I did. Not to use, perhaps, but to remember. I still keep his mug on the top shelf. It's chipped on one side. Brown glaze. The kind they don't make anymore. I never drink from it. I just move it when I dust. There's comfort in patterns, even if no one's watching. Charles used to race through the hallway as a boy, socks sliding on the waxed wood. I would shout after him, warning him about the corners. He'd laugh, crash into the wall, then say, "Worth it." I haven't heard that laugh in years. Not the real one. The deep, belly-shaking one. Only the polite version now filtered, thin, and brief. He calls once every week. Always on Sunday. Always asks if I'm eating well. If I've taken my blood pressure pills. But he never asks what I'm reading. Never mentions poetry. Or memories. Or Daniel. I wonder if he thinks grief has an expiration date. I listen to the radio more now. Mostly classical. Sometimes old jazz if I'm brave enough. Today, it played Autumn Leaves. And I stood by the window, holding a cup of peppermint tea that had gone cold. The same song Daniel hummed while painting our bedroom that one October. The same one he danced to with me in socked feet, right here on the linoleum. I can still feel the pressure of his hand on my back. The slight rhythm of his breathing. Those things never really leave you. Unless someone else comes in and takes them. I keep his old sweater in the linen closet. wrapped in a pillowcase so the moths don't find it. Sometimes I take it out just to press it to my face. Still smells like cedar and rain. I know it's silly. But grief is a creature with its own rules. The house doesn't judge. It holds space for all of it. So I stay. Even if no one else does. Even if my name has quietly begun to disappear from decisions, from calendars, from dinner plans. They say aging is like fading. But sometimes, it feels more like erasure. More intentional. More deliberate. And I wonder, when did I stop being someone worth remembering? Charles used to visit every other weekend. Sometimes with groceries, sometimes with just stories from work. Always with a kiss on the cheek and a, "Hi Mom. You look good." I would cook too much, as mothers do. He never took leftovers. Said Kelsey didn't care for reheated food. She never came inside. Waited in the car most times, engine running, eyes on her phone. Once, I asked if she'd like a cup of tea. She smiled tight. I'm avoiding caffeine. But it wasn't the tea. It was the silence between us. The kind that grows roots when two people have nothing to say. She called me Mrs. Vasquez for the first 2 years of their marriage. Even after I told her, kindly, to just call me Marguerite. Then she stopped calling me anything at all. At Charles' birthday dinner, 2 years ago, she suggested they redo the guest room into a home office. My old sewing machine lived in that room. The one Daniel gave me the year Charles was born. He used to fall asleep next to it as a toddler curled up on a blanket on the floor while I mended his little socks. They gave the machine away. Didn't ask. Just donated it. Charles said, "We didn't think you'd be using it anymore." I smiled then. Nodded. What else was there to say? They weren't cruel. Just efficient. And sometimes, I wonder if that's worse. Efficiency cuts cleaner than malice. You never see the blood. Just the absence. That's what it's like, getting older in a family too busy to remember. Last Thanksgiving, they booked a cabin in the Poconos. I was told 3 days before the trip that the drive would be too hard on me. But it wasn't the drive. It was the photo they posted. Everyone at the table. Even the dog. My chair missing. Or maybe never meant to be there. I didn't say anything. I just baked an apple pie anyway. Left it on the porch for the squirrels. They came in pairs. Ate in silence. Like we used to. Now, Charles visits once a month. Sometimes, alone. Often with hurried steps. His hugs are shorter now. There's a pause before his hand touches my shoulder. Like he's remembering how to be soft. He always brings something: flowers, vitamins, new slippers. As if things can fill in for presents. But last week, he brought something else. Blueprints. Rolled tightly in a tube. Half concealed under his coat. He thought I didn't notice. But I saw him glance at the fireplace. Saw the way his wife looked around the living room like it was already hers. She never said it outright. But her eyes did. This house is wasted on her. And still I offered them tea. Because some habits refuse to die quietly. He promised he'd visit again soon. Said he had plans to go over. I nodded, poured more tea, and watched the steam curl around us like a veil. That evening, I went to the linen closet. Took out Daniel's old sweater. Slipped it over my nightgown, and stood barefoot by the front door. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered into the stillness. I don't think they see me anymore. But I see them. Every glance. Every whisper. Every plan not meant for my ears. And now I wonder. If they've already made room for my absence. What would happen if I gave it to them? The invitation never came. But the photos did. They arrived quietly on my neighbor's phone. Mary Rose, always kind. Always careful with her words. She tapped the screen gently, as if that could soften the blow. It looked lovely, she said. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away. I thought you'd been there. Kelsey's baby shower. A pastel wonderland in someone's backyard. Pink and cream streamers. A cake shaped like a onesie. The kind of event people post with hashtags and big white smiles. Everyone was there. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months. Kelsey's college friends. Even Charles's old soccer coach. But not me. Not even in the blurry background of a group shot. Not even as a name in the caption. I blinked at the photo. Charles stood next to the gift table, holding a tray of pink lemonade, laughing with someone I didn't recognize. He looked comfortable. At home. And there, near the center, Kelsey, radiant in soft lilac, wearing the cardigan I gave her 3 Christmases ago. I remembered it clearly. A rose-colored wool blend. I chose it because it matched her favorite lipstick. She'd smiled politely when she unwrapped it. Said, "Oh, this is sweet." But never wore it. Not until now. I didn't know what that meant. But I felt it anyway. I sat back in my kitchen chair. The one with the cushion Daniel had sewn by hand. Green corduroy with little gold stars. It gave a soft creak when I shifted, a familiar sound no one else would notice. The house was still. Outside, the bird feeder swayed gently in the breeze. A cardinal landed briefly, wings flicking as it pecked at sunflower seeds. Daniel always said cardinals were visitors. "Your mother stopping by," he'd say, pouring coffee with that crooked smile of his. I watched the bird for a long moment. Until it flew off, red wings cutting the air. Leaving just the feeder. And me. Later that evening, I called Charles. I asked how the shower went. There was a pause. Oh yeah. It was mostly Kelsey's friends. Just a small thing. Another pause. Then, "We didn't want to overwhelm you, Mom. It was kind of last minute. Loud, chaotic. You know how that goes." I said, "Sure." Because I didn't trust my voice with anything else. He didn't ask what I did that day. Didn't ask if I was okay. Just told me he'd come by next weekend. Maybe Sunday. I'll bring the kids. I hung up and stared at the empty teacup in my hands. Still warm. Still untouched. Like me. What do you call it? When someone forgets you slowly, but with enough grace that you almost believe it's love? The next time they came over, it was a Saturday. Kelsey stepped inside first, holding a reusable shopping bag filled with toys and snacks. Charles followed, juggling his keys and a phone call. The twins ran past me without looking up. Straight to the living room, where they began pulling cushions off the couch. Their little voices filled the room like marbles rolling on hardwood, noisy, aimless, unstoppable. I smiled anyway. Out of instinct, more than joy. "Hi, sweethearts," I said softly. But they were already somewhere else. Kelsey set her bag on the counter, glanced around the kitchen. "You haven't changed a thing in here, have you?" Her tone was half amusement, half judgment. I looked at the walls. The same pale yellow Daniel chose. The chipped ceramic tiles with faded blue flowers. The wooden spice rack he carved, still full of glass jars with handwritten labels. "No," I said. "It works for me." She didn't respond. Charles walked in a moment later, ending his call with a sigh. "Mom, do you still have that old card table?" he asked. "We thought we'd do lunch outside." I led him to the hallway closet. The table was wedged behind a stack of winter blankets. He took it without thanks. Just a nod. And a, "Got it." I stood in the doorway and watched them set up the patio. Plates. Paper napkins. Juice boxes. A folding chair for each of them. I counted 5. And paused. "Should I bring one more?" I asked. Kelsey turned, surprised. "Oh, you want to sit with us?" I felt my cheeks burn. "Yes, if there's room." "Of course," she said quickly. "I just didn't think you liked the sun." She didn't say it to be cruel. But it landed like a weight. Charles fetched another chair, set it slightly to the side. Not quite in the circle. I sat. Quietly. Listened to their stories. Their work stress. The twins' school activities. No one asked me anything. At one point, I offered a story about Charles as a child. How he once hid under the bed to avoid piano practice. They smiled politely, then moved on, changed the subject, as if I'd interrupted something, as if my memory didn't belong anymore. After dessert, the twins wanted to play a game. Musical chairs. I watched as they ran in circles, laughing, shrieking. When the music stopped, one child was always left standing. One chair always removed. Each round, one less place. I looked down at my folded hands. At the veins along my knuckles. The faint yellow bruise from bumping the counter last week. And I thought, maybe this is how it happens. Not with a slammed door, but with one chair quietly taken away at a time. How many chairs must disappear before you realize you're no longer part of the table? A few weeks later, a package arrived at my door. No knock. No ring. Just a brown cardboard box resting neatly on the welcome mat. The return label said, Shuttersnap. Charles had mentioned something about professional family photos. I brought it inside. Set it on the kitchen table beside my tea. Opened it with the small paring knife I kept in the top drawer. Inside, a leather-bound photo book. Heavy, elegant, gold lettering pressed onto the front. The Vasquez family, Seasons of Us. I took a breath before opening it. Even then, I wasn't prepared. Page after page. Autumn leaves. Snow-covered porches. Kelsey in a red scarf, holding Ava's hand. Charles laughing as the twins leapt off a rock into a pile of raked leaves. There were pictures of the house too. The living room, newly painted. The fireplace mantel stripped of its old photo frames, replaced with minimalist decor. And one page. The dining table dressed for Thanksgiving. The same table Daniel built with his own hands. But the runner was new. The centerpiece foreign. In the corner of the frame, the edge of my rocking chair. Empty. I kept flipping, slowly. Then came the caption page. Simple lines, white on black. Home is where the family gathers. Charles, Kelsey, Ava, Liam, Theo. That was all. No mention of me. Not even as a footnote. Not even as mom or grandma. Just a quiet omission. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that rewrites. I stared at that page for a long time. The silence around me felt tighter than usual. Like the house itself had caught its breath. I thought of my mother's old locket, tucked inside a velvet box upstairs. It held two photos. Hers and mine. Faded. Worn from years of touch. When I was a child, she told me, keep the ones you love close to your chest. I had. For a long time. But now, my name no longer lived in their books. Not in their cards. Not in their table settings. Not even in the stories they chose to preserve. Just a rocking chair. And silence. I closed the album gently. Wrapped it back in the brown paper. Left it by the door, unopened to them. There is a difference between being forgotten and being erased. And I wondered, if they've already written me out of the story, should I keep living in its footnotes? It started with a phone call I wasn't meant to hear. Charles was in the den. I was dusting the hallway shelves, the same ones Daniel built when we moved in. My steps were soft. Careful. I didn't mean to overhear. But the door was slightly ajar. And my name was in his sentence. Yes, she still has full ownership. But the will was never updated after Dad passed. His voice was calm. Too calm. A pause. Then he said it. Technically, she could do whatever she wants with the house. That's why we need to handle this now. Another pause. Longer. No. She won't fight it. She trusts me. I stood still. My hand resting on the wooden edge of the bookshelf. The duster limp in my fingers. There was a draft in the hallway. Or maybe it was just the way the words chilled me. It wasn't a shout or an argument. That would have been easier to process. This was logistics. A plan. A transaction. And I was the variable to be managed. I waited until he ended the call. His footsteps came down the hallway. A smile in his voice. Want to take a drive tomorrow, Mom? Maybe down to the lake? I looked at him. His face so familiar. but something in it had shifted. I nodded, said yes, my voice steady, but something inside me folded in on itself. That evening, I opened the cabinet Daniel and I called our vault. It hadn't been touched in years. The small brass key was still in the drawer beneath the placemats, wrapped in a rubber band that had long since cracked. I turned the key. The cabinet gave a soft groan. Inside, neatly labeled folders. Daniel's handwriting. Even now, it calmed me. The deed was there. Still firm. Still ours. Signed April 1981. His name. My name. Nothing else. Equal. Whole. I sat on the floor, my knees stiff, but I didn't care. My hands moved slowly across the papers. The smell of old paper, faint glue, and dust filled my nose. I traced Daniel's signature. Ran my fingers along the edge of the paper where our life began. This was the proof of everything we built. A porch that leaned just slightly to the left. A roof we patched ourselves after the storm in '89. The lilac bush he planted because I told him it reminded me of my grandmother's garden. None of it had been given. It had been earned. Worked for. Lived in. Loved. And now my son. The boy who once carried nails in his pocket to help Daddy fix the wall. Was making plans to hand it over. To manage it. To sign it away. Without asking. Without speaking it aloud. As if my silence had become permission. I sat there in the dim hallway light. Paper spread around me like fallen leaves. And I felt something shift in my chest. Not rage. Not betrayal. But a quiet understanding. Some things die loudly. Others. In whispers. And I wondered. If someone you love erases your place without touching a thing. Is that grief? Or something more permanent? The next morning, I walked to the post office. It was a habit I'd kept since Daniel passed. Every Tuesday. Rain or shine. It made me feel purposeful. Less adrift. Sometimes the walk gave me more than the mail did. The sound of gravel under my boots. The wind through the bare trees in early spring. The way the sky opened wide over the church roof pale, endless. Edna greeted me with a nod and a small white envelope. Stamped First Elm Bank. No return address. I tucked it into my coat pocket without thinking. Made a few more stops milk, thread, birdseed. Then headed home. It was a quiet afternoon. The kind where the clock seems to move in slow gestures. The kind that invites reflection. Or dread. I made Tearly gray this time. Used Daniel's old mug instead of mine. The chipped handle still rough against my knuckle. He dropped it once, during an argument we later forgot. Funny how some things stay broken but still work. I sat at the kitchen table, the one with the carved legs and uneven wobble. And opened the envelope slowly, carefully. As if the truth inside could be delayed by gentler hands. The letter was short. Too short. A summary of my account. Ending balance. Recent authorizations. Joint access. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. The number on the page was wrong. Smaller than it should have been. Smaller than it had any right to be. Then I saw his name. In black ink, sharp letters. Charles Vasquez, authorized secondary access. Effective 6 months ago. 6 months. I thought back. To that chilly Sunday in November. He came by with papers tucked in a red folder. Said it was for tax prep. For streamlining things. I'd signed it. Without reading. Because I trusted him. Because his voice had sounded warm. Because he was my son. And because love, when stretched too far, begins to blur. I placed the paper flat on the table. Laid both hands beside it, fingers spread. The wood was cold under my palms. A silence filled the room that had nothing to do with sound. I looked up. At the cabinets Daniel had built. The ones I still polished every Thursday. At the yellowed wallpaper we never replaced. At the rocking chair by the window, the one Charles once climbed into with picture books and peanut butter on his chin. I had not changed a thing. And yet everything had shifted. What do you call it? When someone touches your life so gently, you don't notice the taking. Until you're holding something lighter, emptier, and can't remember when the weight disappeared? What is that silence made of? Is it love? Or is it consent dressed in grief? Charles stopped by that Friday. He brought croissants from the bakery downtown. A peace offering, I supposed. Or maybe just a routine. His voice was light. I thought we could go over some paperwork while I'm here. You know, just to keep things organized. I made us tea. Set out 2 mismatched mugs. He took Daniel's without noticing. He never did. We sat at the table. The one where he used to scribble spelling words in crayon. Where Daniel once read aloud the Sunday paper. Where every birthday cake had been sliced. Charles placed a manila folder between us. Nothing major, he said. A couple forms. Beneficiary stuff. It's easier if it's handled now. Clean and simple. I didn't open it. I just looked at him. His eyes flicked toward the window. Avoiding mine. I noticed the way he cleared his throat before speaking. The way he tapped the corner of the folder with his index finger. As if urgency could make it moral. He used the word, streamlining again. Security, too. The vocabulary of soft erasure. I reached across the table, slowly, and placed my hand on the folder. Felt its weight. Felt the quiet undercurrent beneath the gesture. I didn't speak. Just held his gaze. Long enough for the silence to grow roots. Then I pulled the folder toward me and set it aside. I'll think about it, I said. Not yes. Not no. But enough to make him pause. He smiled. That tight, businesslike smile I didn't recognize from his childhood. Of course, Mom. No rush. And he stood. Patted my shoulder. His hand felt heavier than it should have. After he left, I sat there. The croissants untouched. The folder still unopened. Outside, the wind picked up. The bird feeder swayed gently. One of the teacups had begun to crack. A thin line spreading from rim to base. Barely visible. But there. I thought about all the things I'd signed over the years. Permission slips. Report cards. Mortgage renewals. Letters to Santa. And this. This would have been just another signature. Just ink on paper. But it felt like something else. Like drawing a line across my own name. I got up. Placed the folder back in the drawer beneath the linen towels. Buried it beneath the cloth napkins no one used anymore. Not hidden. Just not offered. And in that quiet kitchen, I realized. Sometimes, the most dangerous theft isn't what they take from your hands, but what they try to take from your story. Would you sign away the life you built? Just to keep the peace with someone who's already rewritten your ending? I packed a single suitcase. Not out of impulse. Not in anger. But because I could no longer pretend. The silence in this house had begun to echo in ways I couldn't quiet. Each drawer I opened reminded me of who I used to be. Each step on the creaking floorboard marked a moment that no longer belonged to now. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was all of them, woven together. The unsigned folder. The missing chair. The names left off the photos. My savings. Shared without consent. All of it. Layered like dust. Thin at first, then smothering. The bedroom still held Daniel's scent. Faint, but clinging to the collar of his flannel shirt I'd never washed. I pressed it to my face one last time. Not to cry. I was past that. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The pale blue curtains we picked out the year he turned 50. The dresser with the chipped knob he never got around to fixing. The framed poem above the nightstand. Emily Dickinson, his favorite. Because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me. He used to say it wasn't morbid. It was about grace. I didn't take the poem with me. Some things are too heavy for a suitcase. Downstairs, the kettle began to hiss. I let it. Let the whistle rise. Unapologetically. It was the first sound in days that hadn't asked me to soften. I made tea. Poured it into a plain mug. Left Daniel's untouched on the shelf. I took the last slice of banana bread from the tin and wrapped it in wax paper. A small gesture of familiarity. Then I sat at the kitchen table one final time. The chair creaked beneath me, the same way it had for 40 years. It knew me, more than the people I raised. I wrote a short note. Not of anger. Just fact. I'll be away for a while. Don't worry about me. I won't be far. But I won't be here. I left it on the counter, beside the bread. No signature. Just my handwriting. That would be enough. Then I stood. Picked up the suitcase. Took one last look at the doorframe with Charles's pencil marks. Heights from ages 5 to 10. I touched them gently. Then turned the knob. Stepped out into the fading light. And let the door close slowly behind me. Not slammed. Not locked. Just closed. The motel was quiet. Too quiet, in a way that didn't hold memory. The silence here wasn't heavy, like at home. It was hollow. The clerk had called me ma'am. Without looking up. Room 204. Second floor. No elevator. I climbed the stairs slower than usual. Each step felt like a question I hadn't asked. Each landing a decision I couldn't undo. The key turned stiffly in the lock. Inside beige walls, beige carpet, beige everything. The bedspread had a pattern I couldn't name. Not ugly. Just unfamiliar. There was a small window, half closed. The air smelled like cleaning products and cheap coffee. On the dresser sat a plastic tray with 2 styrofoam cups and a packet of powdered creamer. No kettle. No peppermint tea. I placed the suitcase on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave way too easily. My hands stayed folded in my lap for a long time. I hadn't brought much. A nightgown. 2 blouses. A sweater. The book I never finish, its corners worn from pretending to read it. No photographs. No letters. No lace doilies with Daniel's initials. I reached for the remote. The television blinked on. A cooking show. Too bright, too cheerful. I turned it off. The quiet returned, but it wasn't healing. Not yet. I lay back, stared at the textured ceiling. Thought about the ceiling at home. The water stain shaped like a bird in flight. That Daniel always meant to paint over, but never did. I closed my eyes. Tried to rest. Tried not to feel the corners of the room pressing inward. But even exhaustion couldn't quiet the ache of belonging nowhere. At home, I was fading. Here, I was already gone. I woke sometime after midnight. The lamp was still on. My shoes were still on. And I didn't know how long I'd slept. I walked to the window and opened it slightly. The air smelled like rain on concrete. Not earth. Not leaves. Nothing familiar. A vending machine hummed near the stairwell. Somewhere below, a door slammed. Then silence again. I sat at the small desk by the window. Pulled out the motel notepad. Wrote nothing. Just held the pen. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the words weren't ready yet. I folded the blank page, tucked it into my book. A placeholder. For something. For later. The room was still. Not peaceful. Not yet. But still. And I whispered. Not to anyone, not even to myself. If I no longer belonged in the home I built, and this room held none of my history, then where does a woman like me begin again? On the 3rd morning at the motel, someone knocked on my door. Not loud. Just 2 soft taps. I hesitated. There hadn't been a soul looking for me since I arrived. I opened the door a few inches. It was Mary Rose. She stood there in her rust-colored coat, cheeks flushed, holding a grocery bag and an envelope. "How did you?" She smiled gently. "You didn't answer your phone. I got worried, called the clerk. Told him I was your sister." I stepped aside without a word. She walked in, looked around, then set the bag on the dresser. "Still smells like bleach," she said. Then, softer. "You all right, Margie?" I sat on the edge of the bed. Nodded. Not because I was, but because I didn't know how to explain the kind of tired I carried now. She took a carton of yogurt and a banana out of the bag, placed them on the desk like offerings. Then she handed me the envelope. I recognized Charles' handwriting immediately. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Mary sat across from me, her hands folded over her purse. She didn't rush. Didn't pry. I brought your mail too, she added. A notice from the library board. They're closing the downtown branch next month. I looked up. The one near the bakery? She nodded. They're asking if anyone wants to help box up the old collection. Archive it somewhere. I hadn't thought about that library in years. But I remembered it. The smell of old paper. The hum of the ceiling fan. The time I read aloud from Wuthering Heights, and a group of teens actually stayed until the last page. I said nothing, but something inside me shifted. Barely. A soundless crack in the ice. Mary stood. Touched my shoulder. You don't have to do anything today. But if you want, I'll drive you there tomorrow. Just to look. After she left, I sat at the desk. Unfolded the envelope. Inside was a note from Charles. Short. Efficient. No apology. Just a question. Do you plan to come back? Let me know, so we can sort out next steps. Next steps. As if my life were a lease renewal. A file to be closed. I folded the note. Tucked it into the drawer with the vending machine menu and a plastic spoon. And then, without quite meaning to, I whispered aloud. What if I didn't come back? What if I built something new? In a place they couldn't edit? The next day, Mary came back. Same rust-colored coat. Same gentle presence. She didn't ask if I was ready. She just waited by the car, engine running, heat barely on. I climbed in slowly, my fingers curled inside my gloves. I hadn't worn this coat in years. Still smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. The ride was quiet. Trees flashed by like half-forgotten lines of a poem. Gray sky. Gray roads. But the feeling inside me was not gray. It was unsettled. The library sat on the corner of Chestnut and Twund. A brick building with ivy long dead from the cold. I remembered walking past it on my lunch breaks as a teacher. Always thinking I'd volunteer someday. When life slowed down. Mary pulled into the lot. Only 3 other cars. I'll wait out here, she said. No pressure. I nodded. Then opened the door and stepped into the cold. The lobby smelled exactly the same. Dust. Cardboard. A faint trace of floor wax. The front desk was empty. But a handwritten sign read, "Volunteers in the back." I followed the narrow hallway, my footsteps muffled on the carpet. And then I saw it. The archive room. Half-packed boxes. Stacks of books labeled in fading ink. A long table covered in note cards, rubber bands, and quiet intentions. A woman stood at the far end. Late 30s, maybe. Glasses sliding down her nose. She looked up. Looking for the fiction section? I smiled. Just slightly. I think I used to live in it. She blinked. Then laughed. Help is always welcome. Especially from someone who looks like they know their Brontes. I walked over slowly. Ran my fingers along the spines of a row of books. Willa Cather, I whispered. Eudora Welty. Louise Erdrich. My voice felt unfamiliar. But not unwelcome. She handed me a pen and a stack of labels. Think you can help me tag what's worth keeping? I sat down. Picked up the first book. A copy of The House of Mirth. Pages yellowed. Corners bent. I flipped to the first page. Someone had written a name in blue ink. Marguerite. The loop of the M reminded me of my own. For a moment, I sat there and did nothing. Just held the book. It had belonged to someone. Been read in someone's chair. Maybe cried over. It had a place. A story. And suddenly, so did I. If names can live on paper. If memory can hide in margins. Couldn't I begin again? Between the pages? I returned to the library the next morning. Earlier this time, the building hadn't changed overnight. But something inside me had. I walked straighter, breathed deeper, carried a tote bag filled with 3 books from the motel nightstand. One of them was mine. A copy of Persuasion, with Daniel's name written inside the cover. The young woman from yesterday, her name was Rachel, smiled when she saw me. "You came back," she said. I simply nodded. She handed me a clipboard. "This is the rare list. We're trying to decide what should go to the historical archive versus what goes into community lending." I took the clipboard. Sat in the same spot. The sunlight cut in at the same angle as before, warm and golden, despite the cold outside. An hour passed. Maybe more. I read spines. Sorted books. Made quiet decisions about what deserved to be remembered. And as I worked, I began to picture my own shelves. Back home. Or what used to be home. Hundreds of books. Marginalia. Pressed leaves. Old receipts used as bookmarks. I'd spent years curating them, binding my life between pages. And now, I realized I didn't need to carry all of them with me. But I could carry their meaning forward. That afternoon, I called Mary. "Do you mind driving me back to the house?" I asked. She didn't question it. We arrived near sunset. The porch light hadn't been turned on. The air held that soft ache of coming frost. I didn't knock. Didn't go inside. I opened the side garage instead. Found the blue bins I used each spring for decluttering. I filled them with care. Not clothes. Not keepsakes. Books. Ones with my underlines. With Daniel's initials. With corners turned down like little flags. It took 3 bins to hold what I chose. I left a note on top. For the community archive. These held us for years. May they hold someone else. Mary helped me load them into her car. And for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel heavy. Just open. That evening, I sat back at the motel desk. Same room. Same chair. But something had changed. I poured tea into my own cup this time. No chipped handle. No borrowed memory. Just warmth. And I whispered. Not as a question, but as a beginning. I may no longer live in that house. But I'm not erased. I am still written. Line by line. Shelf by shelf. What about you? Have you ever given away something precious? Not because you were done with it, but because you were ready to begin again? We invite you to share your story below. You are not alone in your second act. The library was quieter on Mondays. Rachel was out sick. The other volunteers were late. I sat alone in the archive room, sunlight streaking through the high windows, falling across stacks of paper like scripture. In front of me, an old city map from 1953, a donation ledger, and a volunteer application form. I wasn't filling it out. Not yet. But I had begun writing my name in the margins. Testing the ink. Testing the feeling of seeing Marguerite Vasquez on something official again. That afternoon, I visited a law office on Maple Street. It was small, tucked between a laundromat and a florist. The receptionist offered coffee. I declined. My hands were already steady. The lawyer was younger than I expected. Late 30s. Kind eyes. Her name was Julia Latham. I handed her the envelope I'd carried for 2 days. Inside, a copy of my house deed, the bank letter, Charles's unsigned folder. She reviewed them silently. When she looked up, her voice was even. Has anyone coerced you into transferring ownership? I shook my head. No threats? None spoken. And you still hold full title? I do. For now. She paused. Took off her glasses. What would you like to do, Mrs. Vasquez? I didn't answer right away. I looked out her window. A birch tree was losing its leaves. One by one. Without sound. But completely. I want to remove my son's access to my accounts, I said. Reverse the authorization. She nodded. I can help with that. I'd also like to reassign the deed, I added. To a foundation. One I'm creating. Julia blinked. Do you have the foundation name? I opened my notebook, wrote 3 words, then turned it toward her. The quiet shelf. She smiled, gently. That's beautiful. I nodded. It's time the books in my life had their own address. One he can't sell. One no one can rename. Julia reached for a blank form. Let's begin. And as she clicked her pen, as paper slid forward on her desk, I felt something loosen inside me. Not bitterness. Not pride. Just a calm resolve. Because silence is not the absence of power. Sometimes, it's the way power breathes. Julia was methodical. She printed the forms, explained each clause with a calm voice. Her words were steady, deliberate. Like someone who knew the weight of what she was returning to me. Not just legal authority, but a kind of lost dignity. I listened carefully, but part of me drifted. Not from disinterest, but from memory. I remembered the first time Daniel and I signed something official together. It was a loan agreement for the house. We were young, unqualified, and trembling. But we signed anyway. He squeezed my hand so hard my knuckles cracked. Then laughed and whispered, "We're really doing this, Margie." That paper sat for decades in our cabinet. Alongside school awards, tax records, and every birthday card Charles ever drew for us as a boy. Now, I was signing again. Not to build a life, but to protect what remained of it. Julia slid the completed forms toward me. I signed slowly, each stroke deliberate. No shaking. No hesitation. It was the quietest act of resistance I'd ever made. She smiled. "You've taken the first step." I nodded. My throat felt tight. But not from fear. From something else. Something like returning. Then I reached into my tote bag. Took out the folded notebook where I'd been sketching out plans for the quiet shelf. A community space. A reading room. Nothing fancy. Just soft chairs, shelves lined with well-loved books. And the kind of silence that doesn't isolate, but embraces. Julia flipped through the pages. "You've thought this through," she said. "I've lived in it," I replied. The design wasn't new. It had lived inside me for years. I just hadn't dared to write it down. Not until now. She asked where I'd house it. I said I'd found a small storefront near the post office. Formerly, a tailor's shop. Wooden floors. Good light. And quiet. I wanted to feel like someone's grandmother opened her living room to the neighborhood, I added. Julia smiled again. "This feels like more than a reading space." "It is," I said. "It's a way of being remembered that doesn't require permission." That evening, back at the motel, I placed the signed documents in a folder. Labeled it in my own handwriting. Personal Autonomy, 2024. Then I made tea. Used my favorite mug, not Daniel's. And let myself sit not as someone displaced, but someone deciding. I was no longer waiting for someone to include me. I was writing myself back in. 2 days later, I returned to Julia's office. It was raining. Not the dramatic kind that demands attention, but the quiet sort that seeps into your sleeves and reminds you of things once forgotten. I wore my blue coat. The same one I'd worn the winter Daniel got sick. Its cuffs were frayed, and a button hung loose by a thread. But it still wrapped around me like memory. So I kept it. The office was warm. A kettle hissed gently in the background. Julia greeted me with a nod, already expecting me. She slid the final documents across the desk. An incorporation certificate. Foundation bylaws. One last envelope, addressed to the state registry. "This is it," she said. "Once this is mailed, the quiet shelf is legally yours. No one can override it. No one can claim it." I ran my fingers over the envelope. The paper was heavy. Smooth. A softness I hadn't expected. Inside it was more than ink. It was every page Daniel ever marked in pencil. Every student I ever read to. Every book that had ever sat, waiting patiently for someone to open it. I took the pen Julia offered. Black, fine-tipped, familiar. I signed slowly. Marguerite Vasquez. Each letter sat with confidence. No shaking. No second-guessing. When I looked up, she was smiling. I didn't return it immediately. I just breathed. She handed me the envelope. It's ready when you are. I walked to the post office alone. No umbrella. The rain was soft enough to tolerate. And somehow, I wanted to feel it. Let it soak into my sleeves. Let it remind me I was still here. The clerk was new. Young. Distracted. She took the envelope with barely a glance. Tracking or standard? She asked. I paused. Then said, standard. Because some things don't need to be tracked. Only trusted. She fed the envelope into a bin behind her. It disappeared from view. And with it, something inside me released. I stood still for a moment longer. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to mark it. Let the silence recognize what had happened. Later, back at the motel, I placed the carbon copy on the small desk. Laid it beside my old notebook and a pen that had started to run dry. I didn't turn on the TV. Didn't boil the kettle. Didn't reach for anything. I just sat. Let the rain tap against the window. Let the quiet settle in the corners of the room. And I whispered. Not for anyone to hear, but simply to let the thought live outside me. Let them keep the house. Let them decorate it. Let them forget. Because what I built, what I signed, what I sealed, was mine. And this time, no one would inherit it. But the story itself. I didn't call ahead. There are moments in life that don't require permission. Only presence. It was a Tuesday. The sky had that early spring stillness gray, but not heavy. Birdsong drifted in from somewhere unseen. Soft. Hesitant. I wore my blue coat again. The one I hadn't washed since December. The cuffs were still frayed, but I didn't care. The weight of it felt right. In my right pocket, an envelope. Plain. Thick. Final. I arrived at the house around 10. The garden looked clipped. Controlled. Nothing wild left. The daffodils Daniel once planted were gone. Replaced with something tidy and decorative ornamental grasses with no scent, no memory. I stood on the porch longer than necessary. Let my breath slow. Let the quiet settle. Then I knocked. 3 firm taps. Not a plea. Just a statement. Charles answered. His face shifted too quickly. Surprise, tension, smile. Like flipping through expressions, he didn't quite believe himself. Momhi, we weren't expecting you. I know. His hesitation wasn't hidden. But manners won. He stepped aside. The air inside was warmer than I remembered. But colder somehow too. The hallway smelled of lemon polish and something synthetic. A scent that doesn't cling to memory. I noticed the little things first. The rug in the foyer was gone. The one with Daniel's muddy boot prints embedded in its fibers. Gone. The photo wall had been cleared. No pictures. Just beige paint, smooth and blank. Kelsey stood in the living room. Hands crossed. Expression tight. She greeted me. A single word. Hi. I didn't remove my coat. I won't stay long, I said. I came to return a few things. Charles looked confused. He gestured toward the kitchen. Want to sit? I shook my head. From my coat pocket, I drew the envelope. Unsealed. Heavy. I'd like you to read this later. He took it slowly. His fingers hovered near the opening flap, but he didn't open it. I could see his jaw tense. The way it used to when he didn't like the answer he'd been given. Inside. A legal transfer of the deed. A revocation of financial control. A note, handwritten in my script. There is nothing left for you to manage. And nothing more for me to surrender. He looked up. I don't understand. You don't have to, I said. But you will. I turned then, but paused. The space felt unfamiliar. Like someone else's rented life. Where our bookcase used to be. A mirrored console. Where Daniel's chair once sat, a velvet bench no one touched. And I knew. Whatever was rooted here had already been uprooted. I met Charles' eyes. Not with anger. Not with sorrow. Just clarity. Then I stepped back out into the light. And for the first time in years, I wasn't leaving something behind. I was walking forward with nothing in my hands, but everything I'd just reclaimed. I didn't look back as I stepped off the porch. The wooden planks beneath my feet didn't creak like they used to. Charles must have replaced them. Tighter wood. More efficient. But no memory in the grain. The gravel crunched under my boots. A clean, distinct sound. I welcomed it. Behind me, the door closed softly. Not a slam. Not a click. Just the kind of closing that happens when no one's sure whether to follow. I kept walking until I reached the sidewalk. Paused by the mailbox. Ran my hand across its side. The red flag chipped from age. We'd painted it once, Daniel and I. Black with gold numbers. He said it made the house look proper. It still stood. But even it looked like it belonged to someone else now. I imagined Charles standing in the living room, still holding the envelope. Still not opening it. He wouldn't shout. That wasn't his way. No confrontation. No tears. Just the slow realization that everything had shifted. And none of it could be undone. He would read the legal language. See the foundation name. The notarized signature. He'd flip to the note last. My handwriting unmistakable. That steady loop in the capital M. He'd read the words twice. Maybe 3 times. Looking for blame. But there'd be none. Because this wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was removal. Clean. Quiet. Complete. I imagined Kelsey asking what it meant. Her voice flat. Her arms crossed like always. And Charles saying nothing for a long time. Just sitting. Just understanding. Not all at once. But in slow, settling waves. Meanwhile, I walked. Not far. Just to the corner. There, under the half-bloomed dogwood. I let myself stop. The wind stirred the branches overhead. A few petals fell white, thin, like small decisions drifting down. I watched them land. Soft. Unannounced. And it struck me that sometimes justice doesn't look like balance. Or even fairness. Sometimes, it's simply the quiet right to walk away. With your name intact. I reached into my pocket. Felt the outline of the second copy. The one I kept. The one Julia had labeled, client copy, executed. I didn't need to reread it. I just needed to hold it. Proof, not of power. But of return. And as the wind touched my face, cool and constant, I closed my eyes for one long breath. Because in that moment, everything that had been taken was already on its way back to me. That evening, I returned to the reading room. It was still unfinished. Half the books in boxes. Walls bare. 2 chairs mismatched. But it was mine. Every corner knew my name. I flipped the lights on one by one. Their glow was soft, almost apologetic. Perfect for a space meant for reflection, not display. On the front table, I laid out the first stack of books. Not the rare ones. The ones with history in their margins. Tea stains. Folded corners. Pencil notes that only made sense to someone who had read slowly, and with feeling. I opened a volume of Emily Dickinson. Page 42. Hope is the thing with feathers. Daniel once read that to me. When I couldn't sleep after the funeral of my sister. Back then, I'd clung to the rhythm of the words. Like a railing in the dark. Now, I read it aloud to the empty room. My voice quiet. Steady. No one else was there to hear. But that wasn't the point. I read for myself. And for the women like me. Who would someday sit in these chairs. Searching for themselves between the lines. Outside, the rain had returned. Not loud. Just enough to be noticed. I pulled the curtains. Lit the small lamp in the corner. and sat down with my ledger. There were still forms to fill, names to add to the donor wall, a schedule to draft for our soft opening. I wrote slowly. Each letter, a declaration of stillness reclaimed. When I paused, I poured myself a cup of tea chamomile this time. I didn't think about Charles. I didn't wonder if he had opened the envelope, or if Kelsey had said anything. I didn't imagine their expressions. I didn't rehearse what I would say if they ever came to find me. Because this was never about confrontation. Never about being seen. It was about ending the quiet erasure. By writing something permanent in its place. The room hummed with the smallest kind of peace. Not loud. Not proud. But true. And as I placed the last book on the shelf, I ran my fingers along the spine, closed my eyes, and whispered not in sorrow, but in final knowing. They never had to say I was right. They just had to learn that I was no longer waiting to be included. What does it mean when justice isn't loud, but it still echoes? The quiet shelf opened on a Thursday. There was no ribbon cutting, no speeches, no local news coverage. Just a handwritten sign on the glass door. Now open. Come in. Sit a while. By noon, the first visitor arrived. An older woman with soft white curls and a tote bag full of knitting. She didn't speak much. Just walked the shelves slowly. Then settled into the corner chair with a copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God. I made us both tea. Mint for her. Chamomile for me. We sipped in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't weigh. The kind that says, you don't have to explain anything today. The room smelled of books, old wood, and lemon oil from the cloth I used every morning. By the second week, more came. Not many, but enough. A retired teacher. A teenage girl with paint on her hands. A man who never borrowed anything, but always returned to sit by the window and hum quietly under his breath. No one asked me about the house. No one mentioned Charles. And I didn't offer it. Some chapters don't need to be told out loud. To be understood. Every morning, I arrived before opening, and dusted each shelf with a clean cloth. Not because they were dirty, but because I wanted the books to feel seen. Sometimes, I whispered the names on the spines as I passed them. Not out of ritual. Just affection. Morrison. Baldwin. Carson. Cather. Bishop. I placed Daniel's favorite volume on the top shelf near the window. He used to say that books should face the light, so they don't forget they come from it. I found myself smiling more. Not in grand bursts, but the kind that lives in your chest and doesn't demand to be noticed. One morning, I found a note left beside the teapot. It read, "Thank you for this room. It reminds me who I used to be." There was no name. No handwriting I recognized. And yet, I felt like I had known her for years. That's what healing had become for me. Not a destination. Not a moment. But a room. A slow, steady rhythm. A collection of days where nothing hurt too much, and everything was just enough. Some mornings, I arrived early enough to hear the birds in the alley. They sang whether anyone was listening or not. And I thought, maybe that's what legacy truly is. Not the echo, but the original sound. Sung anyway. Not the monument, but the empty chair someone chooses to sit in, because the room made space for them. And in that soft, unfolding peace, I began to understand. I had not been erased. I had simply been rewritten. Line by quiet line. That afternoon, the sun came through the windows just right. Warm, golden, and slow. I sat by the front desk, a cup of Earl Grey beside me, the steam curling into the air like a soft question. The radio played something old. A string quartet. Maybe Brahms. The kind Daniel used to hum when washing dishes. His hands moving rhythmically as if time lived in warm water. I had forgotten how much silence could hum. How it could be full, not empty. The quiet shelf had become more than a room. It was a rhythm. A way of breathing. People came and went. Some left bookmarks. Others left notes tucked between pages. One woman left a pressed leaf inside a copy of Jane Eyre. I still haven't moved it. And every now and then, someone would ask, "Who started this place?" I would smile and say, "Just a woman who needed somewhere quiet to sit." Because I no longer needed to be known. Only to leave something worth remembering. The books remembered for me. Their margins carried my questions. Their underlines held my choices. Even when no one saw me lift them. Even when the shelf was empty and the lights dimmed. My story was there. Not behind glass. Not locked in a vault. But held in hand. Passed from reader to reader. One morning, a little girl sat in the corner seat. She couldn't have been more than 8. Big glasses. Frizzy hair. She brought no books. Just herself and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. She didn't say much. But before she left, she turned to me and whispered, "I like it here. It's quiet, but it feels like somebody's listening." And that was the moment I knew. I had given the world something it didn't know it was missing. A room where silence spoke. Where memory rested gently. Where names didn't have to be famous to matter. That night, I walked home slowly. The streetlights had just flickered on. The sidewalks were still damp from afternoon rain. And the smell of earth clean, dark, familiar rose up like a hymn. When I opened the door to my small apartment, everything was still. No voices. No demands. Just the quiet shape of a life I chose. I made tea. Lit a candle. Sat with a blanket over my knees. And my own name, written in the corner of a registry file. Tucked inside the drawer. And I whispered. To every woman who had ever been told she was too much. Or too little. Or too late. You don't need permission to matter. You never did. You just need space. A chair. A book. And the courage to stay seated in your own story. Long enough to finish the last line. So I ask you, now, what would your quiet shelf hold? What do you still carry? Waiting for the right room to set it down in? We invite you to share your own story in the comments below. Because here at Kamar FM, justice can be quiet, but it is never weak. You are not alone. You are heard. And you are always, always welcome back.